Are you new to off-roading and looking to get either a CB or a ham, but you're not sure which one is better? I'm going to real quickly go over the differences between the two, and I'm going to tell you which is better, CB or ham. So since the technologies are so different, you really have to decide on either one, the other, or both. So which one is better? As usual with complicated life questions like this, the answer is, it depends. Both are relatively cheap. You can get a small handheld ham radio like this one, which is a very popular model, for about $75, $80, maybe even less. You can also get a small handheld CB radio like this one, which is the one that I use, for $50 to $60. So the price difference in the base models isn't that different. Now you could spend a lot more for a ham or a CB, but for the basic features, you really don't have to. I put the links to both this CB radio, which is the one that I use, and this ham radio, which is very popular. In the information section down below, you can shop around and get an idea of prices as well as other models. Now, one big difference between CB and ham radios is that CBs are a lot simpler to use. You basically take a CB radio out of the box, hook it up to power or put the batteries in it, turn it on, set a channel, and you start talking. The only complicated thing you have to do is make sure the guy you want to talk to is also on the same channel that you're talking on. There's really not much more to it. They're very basic and very simple. Now, ham radios, on the other hand, are a bit more complicated. They can do a lot more, they're a lot more sophisticated, it's a whole different type of technology, and unless you know how to use a ham radio, you're not going to take one out of the box and go out on the trail and start using it without reading some instructions and doing some learning. It's not even legal to use a ham radio unless you have a license, so you have to study for that, take the test, get the license. There's just a lot more to using a ham radio than there is to using a CB. So don't plan on going out on the trail and think that if you get in an emergency, you can just pull your ham radio out of the box that you've never looked at before and think you're going to be able to reach somebody and get some help. It doesn't work that way. You really have to know what you're doing to use one. So as far as simplicity and ease of use, CB radio is a lot easier. So the range on CB radios is fairly limited. In perfect conditions, you might get a few miles range. And it doesn't matter if you've got a small handheld unit like the one that we use or a big, fancy, expensive one with all the knobs and dials on it. The legal limit of power output on a CB radio is 4 watts. That means that no matter what, the range on this little CB is not going to be any less than the range on a big fancy one, assuming you're using the same antenna. So if you've decided on a CB radio, don't think that by getting a more expensive CB, it's going to get you better range. The antenna that you're using is more important as far as range and making sure that it's connected and tuned properly than how expensive the radio is or how many fancy buttons or dials it has. Now with ham radio, if you have your license, and if you know how to use it, and if you know how to program it to use a repeater that's nearby, you can talk to somebody virtually anywhere on the planet. The technology is a lot better, the sound quality is much better, the range, again, if it's programmed and if you're using it properly, is virtually unlimited. There really is a big difference in a ham versus a CB. It's like AM radio versus FM radio, and ham is definitely the FM. So I've quickly gone over a few of the differences between CBs and hams. Which one is better? Which one should you get? So even though the ham radio is technically better than a CB, there is one area in which the CB is hands down better than the ham radio. Now all the ham radio guys are going to hate when I say this, but they cannot deny the fact that their fancy ham radio is absolutely useless if you're on the trail or if they're on the trail and everybody else in your group is using a CB radio. If everybody else is using a CB radio and all you have is a ham, so nobody can hear you, you can't hear them. So really which one is better really boils down to what you want to do or how you're going to use it. If the groups that you go out with more often all use CB radio, then the CB radio is going to be best for you. Most beginner groups use CB radios. That's what we use on our groups. It's what we require when people come out. So if that's the case, go get yourself a CB radio. If the group that you go out with most often requires ham radio, then you need to go get yourself a ham, you need to study up for your license and take the test, get the license, and in that case, the ham radio is better. If you're looking for something for emergency use, maybe you go out overlanding a lot, you want to have something in case of emergency where there's no cell phone service, then in that case, a ham radio with your license and knowing how to use it is going to be the best choice. So if you have to choose one or the other, at least you know a few of the differences, How much you spend on one or the other doesn't really make much of a difference. Most off-roaders start with CB radios, and then if they want, they move up to ham radio. Again, it takes a lot more learning. You got to study. You have to have the license to legally use a ham radio. But for most cases, if you're first starting out, CB radio is probably the best choice. So which do you have? Which do you recommend, CB or ham, and why? We want to know. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you use and why you use it and what you recommend to new off-roaders and why. And if you have any questions about anything I've said, just leave a comment below. We'll try to answer it as quickly as possible.